Hey, welcome back to Code on the Road. Today is the anniversary of the freeze from last year. Today is the anniversary of the freeze from last year where, all of our electricity was gone. It was super cold. And unfortunately, a few hundred people lost their lives from it, and other people were injured from being exposed to the extreme cold that we're just not prepared for here in Austin. This is more typical, at least more typical than the cold weather. Obviously, we have cold snaps, but this is more typical of a mid-February. It's about 72 degrees, and unfortunately, you can hear it's a little windy. There's even some folks over here you might be able to see out on a blanket with their dog enjoying the nice weather. Guy had his shirt off when I walked by earlier, so it's warm enough to be out laying in the sun with your shirt off or just wearing a t-shirt. So I thought I would take the opportunity to talk about how I prepared for this year after what I learned last year, knowing that it was unlikely to happen again, but that it could happen again. And we actually did have a much milder cold snap. Talking about the cold snap we just had a couple weeks ago, it didn't get nearly as cold. So they made changes to the grid. Obviously, it became a big deal to everybody, both politically as well as just organizationally, to make sure that we didn't lose power this year. And ERCOT, the power authority here that manages all the power producers and the power companies in Texas and the transmission and so on, they of course made sure that they had plenty of power. So we weren't tested as strongly as we were last time, but everybody was very prepared for this cold snap, and we had plenty of reserve power on tap, and we didn't even get close to it, and it wasn't nearly as cold. We were below freezing in the 20s at night and in the 30s during the day. It was that way for 2 or 3 days, but it wasn't nearly as cold as what we had last year, where we were in single digits and maybe getting into the 20s during the daytime. But what I did learn this year is that, even if it wasn't as cold, it seems like in these winter storms, there seems to be a long gray period. And by the time that we get a big winter storm, I'm already low on power. If I'm just trying to run my house off of the power that I produce, because it's gray for a long time and I'm using it, and so every day my reserves are going down because I'm just not getting refilled with the sunshine every day. So coming into the storm this year, I had the same problem, that my batteries were already pretty low because it had been gray for 3 or 4 days and still kind of cold. But the difference this year is that Stormwatch, first of all, I kept Stormwatch on. Last year I turned it off because I didn't want to use grid power. And this year Stormwatch seemed to work even better. It came on earlier. My battery charged all the way up, and it stayed on the entire time. I basically didn't use the battery power at all during the storm. Because Stormwatch was on by design and kept my batteries at 100%, and then the house was continually using the grid. So if the power went off at any moment during that storm, I would have had 100% reserves to get me through however long the power was off, and hopefully I could make it to the other side. And of course, with solar, if it was producing, I would be recharging during the entire period. So one of the things I found, as you may have seen in the original video from last year, we had all that snow, and that snow stuck on my panels, particularly my east panels. And so in the mornings, I wasn't producing much power last year. I didn't think it would be nearly as bad this year, and it wasn't. But I was surprised at the impact that I did have this year, because we had a wintry mix. We had sleet, freezing rain, and a little bit of snow, but it was mostly the sleet and freezing rain. And so I actually did get accumulation on my panels, and it stayed the entire time. So I had a reduced production of solar on those east panels yet again, because I had frozen snow, ice, and sleet on my panels. It wasn't nearly as covered as last year. It wasn't nearly as deep, but it did affect my production, and it mattered because it was gray and I wasn't producing very much in the first place. So I would have been able to produce more if I hadn't had the snow and the ice on there. One of the preparation efforts I did over the course of the year for this year was to get a telescoping pole to be able to reach up to the solar panels on the roof of the house on the second floor and be able to knock snow and ice off of there, or at least try to knock the snow and ice off of there if I had accumulation on it. Now, I didn't use it this year. It wasn't necessary. I had plenty of power, and I didn't need to worry with it. But I did have it ready in case I needed to knock the snow and the ice off. Now, given the fact that it was ice and sleet on there, I probably couldn't have knocked it off if I'd tried, because it was frozen solid and had been frozen on there for a couple days. So that wouldn't have been. It just probably wouldn't have come off unless I'd really just gotten up there and knocked on it hard, and I probably would have damaged my solar panels even if I was doing it by hand or something. So I didn't bother getting up there and doing it. Another thing that was really interesting about this year is that I didn't even try to stay off grid. Throughout most of the year, I try to stay off grid. I try to ration my power to my electricity to be only what I'm producing myself, and to avoid using power from the grid as much as possible. That's just my personal goal for my system, is to try to stay off the grid and to be self-sufficient, and to know that my energy source is renewable and that I'm self-sufficient. This year, just given the experience last year, and even though I was pretty sure it wasn't going to be as bad as it was last year, I just decided that I wanted to be comfortable, and if the power did go out, I wanted to have the house as warm as possible, and I wanted to have the battery as full as possible, because of the experience last year. So as I mentioned earlier, Stormwatch was running, my battery was 100% full, and I was running off grid power through the entire storm. And I also kept the house warm, and in fact I kept the house warmer than I normally keep it, because if the power was to go off, I wanted to have the ambient heat to be able to keep the house warm for as long as possible, not knowing how long I might be without power. Of course, my plan was to use the battery power to run my HVAC system, my heating system, which is gas powered, but to use the blower and all of that to heat the house for as long as possible. But the warmer it was, the less energy it would take to heat the house, and the longer I could go through an outage and stay warm. The other major learning that I took from last year was that my electric car, my Tesla car, was in the garage last year, and it had an almost full battery. I think it was about 250 miles, and I was racking my brains during the outage trying to figure out how to get power out of the car to be able to do even simple things like keep my internet up with Google Fiber, or be able to put power on my stove, electricity for my stove, so that I could turn on the gas heat. And my stove has a safety feature that the gas won't work if the electricity is off. So one of the things that I learned is that I could have used the inverter that I have in the car, that I keep in the car for plugging in my computer or a coffee pot or whatever when I'm camping. And I was prepared this year that if I needed it, I could have plugged in the inverter in the car and used that to power small amounts of electricity, like the Wi-Fi box, the router for Google Fiber, so that I could have internet service and be able to use my phone on that and be able to communicate, because the cell service was almost inoperable last year, where the cell towers went down because of bad generators and lack of electricity. And likewise, I think it would have powered the stove too. I could have unplugged the stove from the wall, plugged it into the inverter, and been able to run the stove, have electricity on the stove, so that I could then use the gas on the stove to be able to cook. And then the other thing that happened is that last year the power went out, and our water treatment plant went out. And so if our pipes weren't froze, which mine were froze for a day or so, but I did have water for a lot of the time, but then the water was not potable. It wasn't drinkable because we had the power plant lost power and had a water issue. I could use the stove to boil water and so on if I needed to do that. Now, I have water in the house just for that. And in fact, we actually did have we had a boil water advisory that was coincidentally around the same time as the winter storm this year, although supposedly it wasn't related, and I don't mean to imply that it was. So I was prepared this year. It wasn't as much of a test, probably wasn't even really a close test to what we had last year, but I had a plan, I was prepared, and I think it would have done a lot better if we'd been out of power for, days at a time. To recap, I had a pole so that I could telescope and, reach 30 feet up to the top of the house and wipe snow off. That would have at least reduced the amount of time for the snow and ice to melt off the solar panels. I probably still would have had some outage, but I could get the loose snow off and have it melt faster. I had power in my car so that I could have some level of electricity from the car to be able to have communication services and be able to power the stove. And then I had the house warm so that I could last longer, and Stormwatch was running so that my battery was completely full, not only halfway full, if I were without power. And fortunately, I wasn't tested on all of it. I was cozy the whole time, and it was great. And now maybe winter's over. It's more like spring. So hope everybody's staying safe this winter and everybody's comfortable. And please leave a message down in the comment below if there's anything you'd like to discuss about it, or you have any comments. And please click like, and so long for now.